All right. Ever feel like you've experienced a straight-up miracle?
Hmm.
Well, get this. Today we're diving deep into a story about surfers, probability, and a chanting ritual that supposedly can bring waves on demand.
Oh, wow. This should be interesting.
Yeah, and it all comes from a book called Voodoo Voodoo and Two More Waves by David Christopher Lane.
Okay.
So basically, in this deep dive, we're not trying to prove or disprove anything.
Right.
We just want to understand how we all perceive these unlikely events.
Yeah, that makes sense. Perception can be really powerful.
Totally. So picture this, a bunch of teenage surfers hanging out on Coral Beach in Malibu.
Okay.
But it's a totally flat day, no waves at all.
So they're just kind of stuck there bored.
Exactly. And that's when one of them, just out of the blue, starts chanting, Voodoo, Voodoo, and two more waves. You know we need them, and we need them today.
Wait. Really? That's kind of funny.
I know, right?
Ugh.
But here's the crazy part. They all start chanting this thing together, and then, guess what? Waves actually show up.
Wow, that's a pretty big coincidence.
It is. But years later, the author of the book has a similar experience. This time, he's in Waikiki with his young son.
Okay.
Again, flat ocean, bummed out kid. So he decides to teach his son the chant. They do the whole voodoo voodoo thing, and boom, waves appear.
That's pretty wild. But, like, isn't it more likely that it's just a coincidence?
Yeah, that's what we're going to explore. You see, there's this thing called Littlewood's law of large numbers. Basically, it means that if you do something enough times, eventually, even the most unlikely event is going to happen.
Right. So if you're out in the ocean enough, sooner or later you're going to see waves right after you, I don't know, sing a song or something.
Exactly. It's just probability playing out over time.
Gotcha. So it's not really magic, it's just math.
Pretty much. But our brains, they love to find patterns and make meaning out of things.
Oh, yeah. We're always looking for connections, even when they're not really there.
Totally. So we latch onto that coincidence, the chant and the waves, and assume there's a connection.
Like cause and effect.
Exactly. We forget about all the other times the surfers chanted and nothing happened.
So we only focus on the times it seemed to work. Interesting.
It's just like playing the lottery. We remember the few people who win big, but we don't think about the millions who bought tickets and lost.
Right, right. So our perception is kind of skewed.
Totally skewed. And the author actually has a name for this. He calls it desultory decussation.
Desultory, what was it?
Decussation. Basically, it means seemingly random intersection of unrelated events. Like, imagine you buy a new car, let's say a bright red sports car, and then suddenly you start seeing red sports cars everywhere.
Oh, yeah, I've had that happen.
It's not like there are suddenly more red sports cars out there.
Right.
Your brain is just primed to notice them now.
So it was always there, I just wasn't paying attention.
Exactly. So desultory decussation isn't about actual cause and effect. It's more about how our brains filter and interpret the world.
We connect the dots, even when the dots are totally random.
And that makes you wonder, how many times have we all thought we were super lucky or had some kind of sixth sense?
Yeah, when it was just probability and perception playing tricks on us.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But let's say we take the magic out of the voodoo chant.
Okay.
Do you think it could still play some role in this whole wave summoning thing?
That's a great question. It makes me think about belief and expectation. Maybe that plays a part.
Yeah, maybe. And that's exactly what we're going to explore the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've talked about how probability can make those crazy long shot things happen if you just give them enough time.
Right.
And we've seen how our brains, they just go nuts connecting dots, even when those dots, well, they're not connected at all.
Yeah, yeah.
But I got to ask, what about belief? Do you think the surfer's belief that this chant actually works, does that actually do anything?
It's a good question, and to be honest, it pushes us to that edge of science where things get a bit fuzzy. It's not that I'm saying thoughts can control the world, like you're willing ways to come in, but it's more about, well, how our beliefs and expectations can kind of shape how we see things, how we act, you know?
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's not like they're Jedi or something, right?
Right, it's more subtle. Imagine like a gardener planting seeds.
Oh,
The gardener can't force those seeds to sprout.
right. They just set the stage.
Exactly. They create the right environment, the sunlight, the water, the good soil, and well, that gives the seed the best shot at actually growing.
Ah, so with our surfers, maybe their hardcore belief in this voodoo thing,
Yeah.
combined with the whole ritual of it all, It's like they're creating that perfect environment in their minds to actually be ready for the waves.
Exactly. It's almost like they're tuning their brains to a certain frequency, the wave frequency, making them way more sensitive to any little hint of a swell coming.
It's kind of like those placebo studies. They give people a sugar pill, but tell them it's some miracle painkiller. And some people, they actually feel less pain. It's like their brain believes it's working, so their body actually
It
responds.
really shows you the power of the mind, right?
Absolutely.
And in our surfer story, maybe believing in the chant makes them notice any random wave action and think, boom, the chant worked. It's kind of like we only see what we're expecting to see.
Confirmation bias, right? We talked about that before.
Bingo. So the chant's not magically creating waves, but it's messing with their perception, making
Mhm.
them more likely to notice those waves when they do show up.
Which then makes them believe even more that the chant works.
Exactly. They chanted, waves came, so it must be the chant. The story just writes itself, even if it's based on a misunderstanding of how chants and perception really work.
This whole thing, like belief actually shaping reality, is pretty mind-blowing. It makes you wonder how much of what we see is just through the lens of what we already expect or believe.
Now, that's a question that's been keeping philosophers and scientists up at night for ages.
I bet.
We may never have all the answers, but just digging into these concepts, it makes you realize how connected our inner world and the outer world really are.
Yeah, peeling back the layers, getting more complex with each one.
That's it. But even with all this talk about probability and perception and belief, I gotta admit, there's a part of me that still wonders, is there something more here? Could they be tapping into something we don't get yet? Some unseen force or energy or something?
That is the question, and that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the last part of our deep dive. All right, so we've looked at how probability can make those crazy long shot things happen and how our brains just love connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And we even went into that fascinating world of belief, how what we expect can really shape what we experience. But there's this one last piece that's got me curious.
Oh.
Intention. Could the surfers actually wanting the waves so much, like they're chanting and focusing on it, could that actually be playing a role?
It's a fascinating thought, and it really takes us past just seeing patterns and into this idea that our inner world could actually be connected to the outer world. Now, the author, he doesn't say he knows for sure, but he brings up this cool analogy about a gardener planting seeds.
Right. The gardener doesn't actually force those seeds to grow, do they?
Exactly. They create the environment, the sunlight, the water, the soil.
They kind of just set the stage.
Exactly. And maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe our intentions, they don't directly control stuff outside of us, but they create the space inside where things can happen.
So it's not about controlling the ocean with your mind.
Right.
More like aligning yourself with what you want, like setting your compass.
That's a great way to put it, like tuning into a specific destination and then actually taking steps to get there. In the case of the surfers, maybe it's that intense desire for waves combined with the chanting. It creates this like mental and emotional openness to those waves.
Like all those times when I've really, really wanted something and things just kind of fell into place.
Mm.
Was that just luck? Or was my intention actually doing something?
Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's tough to say for sure, but it's worth thinking about. Maybe our intentions, the things we focus on and really want, maybe they're more powerful than we give them credit for.
It's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Exactly. Our beliefs, what we expect, they shape things.
And it's not just some new age thing. Yeah.
Oh, definitely not.
Hmm.
Lots of old traditions and spiritual practices, they've been saying this for centuries.
Right.
And even now, like real science is starting to look into whether consciousness can actually have an effect on, well, on matter.
It's wild to think that we might be way more connected to everything around us than we realize.
So are surfers just lucky, or are they actually creating their reality with the ocean? Maybe a bit of both. The cool thing about this story is that it doesn't make us choose between a scientific explanation or something more, well, mystical.
It lets both exist.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, being skeptical, but also open to the mystery of it all, questioning and exploring and staying curious.
That's what I love about this whole deep dive. Makes you think, but keeps you open to all the possibilities.
We've covered a lot, from probability to perception, belief to intention.
Definitely. So I think our listeners are ready for that final thought to take away, that question that sticks with them.
Okay, so think about a time when something happened to you that seemed impossible, maybe magical or just too good to be true. Now, think about what you were believing and what you were focused on leading up to that. Maybe, without even realizing it, you set the stage for that experience. Were you the gardener planting the seeds for that moment?
That's a great question to end on. Makes you realize we might have more power than we think. And that wraps up our deep dive for today.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your intentions aligned with your deepest desires.